Recording Sam Howell in the studio. How did you find the icebreaker? What did you think of the icebreaker?
Interesting. The last question floored me completely.
I noticed. Which leads us naturally into the start of this podcast. Right, you mentioned, just before we hit record, you mentioned that you listened to the Mandy Bostwick episode, which is number 99.
Yeah.
And so what was interesting about that episode for you then, as someone who with experience in nursing, caring for people, and also on the mental health side?
It was the fact that she, for years, I'd sort of recognised my own trauma, and I'd known that it was sort of physical rather than mental. So although it originated, the sensations that my body would feel would originate from memories that my brain would trigger, it was very much a physical experience, not a mental health experience. So to me, it was I'd never felt it was a mental health condition. I felt it was a physical condition that was caused.
How did you know that?
Just the way because although when I was triggered, for example, I'd have particular thought processes, it was how it would make my body feel. It would make me feel exhausted. It would make me dissociate, which I wouldn't use the word lucky, because you'd rather it hadn't happened at all, but if I dissociate, I operate on rubber time, so I'll look at the clock and I'll think 10 minutes have gone by and it's 4 hours, but I can still do everything I need to do. I'm still safe to be around. But yeah, so what I sort of really related to was when she was talking about how when all our systems are breached, when we think we're going to die, basically, whether or not they come back online is dependent on how many times it happens, what happens after those systems are breached. And I realised that I'd actually found my own way of coping with the fact that I was those people that sort of one of those people who'd reached the point of no return, and I'd kind of accidentally gone about basically separating my own self from my mind, which was actually controlling my body, if you like. And that was what Rock's Recovery helped me to do. So, yeah, that's what I thought I'd sort of talk about today. What took me up to that point?
I was talking to someone by chance about Mandy's episode on. I was talking to them on Saturday, and it's in the rugby context, and we were talking about CTE and concussions and the onset of Alzheimer's and things like this in rugby players now, which become quite prevalent. But I was explaining about how and TBIs. I was explaining how brain injuries, like minor or major, and things like concussion and that, are like a huge, if not the entire percentage of what that is down to is neuroendocrinology, like brain hormones. And the person I was explaining it to, I need to send him the Mandy podcast. I need to send him the Mark Gordon. Have you listened to the Mark Gordon episode? I need to send him that one as well. But he couldn't believe it. It's like, and that's what Joe Public, like the average baseline sort of understanding is. They think something that is manifesting itself mentally in your psyche is entirely to do with just the way you think, and you can sort it out by talking and blah blah blah, and you can alleviate it in some ways like that. But then a massive part of it is literally, like your point, the physiological side is literally this hormone imbalances going on in the brain, and you can simplify it to that level. It's not simple, doesn't mean it's not easy mind or not a complex thing, but you can simplify it that way. I completely hijacked where you're going with that then. So,
No.
So explain your background for people, please. Because it's interesting that you made the connection between that you were able to see that it was a physiological thing that was causing your mental state, but also causing the tiredness and all the rest of it. And I think you were probably only able to do that because you had knowledge of the human body.
Yeah. So my professional background's in nursing. I was a research scientist before I was a nurse, but nursing was really my vocation. I absolutely love it. I still do it now, but just not as much. But I throughout my life, from the time I was born, I experienced significant trauma, and repeated trauma, physical and mental. And what I started to notice was things that I was feeling myself, I was seeing in patients. So I remember we had one guy, and he would come in again and again and again, and he I have to be quite careful that I don't accidentally identify someone, because nurses have to be quite careful, because we don't have to if we give a scenario, we don't have to give somebody's name, address and telephone number to breach confidentiality. So if I slow down, it's literally just because I'm trying to
No worries.
think.
If I walk behind you like I'm doing now, it's to adjust the light.
Yeah. So we had this chap that used to come in again and again and again, and he used to say, I'm at risk. I'm a risk to people. I'm going to hurt people. And I remember the one day, I remember saying to him, "What's your background? What did you do?" And he'd been all over the world. He'd been in the army for 26 years, and he'd been all over the world in the most horrendous conflicts. And he had become convinced that he was still a danger to people. And I remember just giving him a hug and saying, "Well, I'm not scared of you. So let's sit down and talk about it," because I could see that all of these processes were kicking off in his body that were making him feel things, and he was sweating. You could see his heart. The one day his heart was almost beating out of his chest, because his heart rate was so elevated and his respiratory rate, and he was sweating so much. And I just remember just giving him a hug and saying, "Let's just see if we can get you to calm down, to re-regulate yourself." Actually, calm down is probably the worst thing you can actually say to someone when they're distressed, but if you say it in the right way, in the right context. And when I actually started to get information from him, this was a fair few years ago, I eventually got him to self-refer to combat stress, and because that was all that was available back then. This was quite some time ago, and he stopped frequenting A&E, because he started to get a handle on it, and he realised that when he was triggered, he wasn't a risk to people. It was the things that he'd done in the past. I had another person came in who, and this was fairly recently, and again I have to be quite careful, quite generic, but she was the nurse that handed her over. She came up to me and she said, alcoholic, falling over in the street, really smug. I thought, really? I thought, I'll be the judge of that. I'm the qualified nurse here, not you. So this person had come off an ambulance, and I walked in the cubicle, and drunk people smell like drunks, so alcoholics smell like drunks. So one of the things you do is you walk in a cubicle and you take a really deep breath through your nose, and I couldn't smell alcohol. And I said, "Well, it's been handed over to me that you've fallen over in the street because you were drunk. And so what did you drink?" "Half a bottle of vodka." "Okay." And I said, "And when did you drink that half a bottle of vodka?" "About 2 or 3 hours ago." I said, "So you're now almost sober and I can't smell alcohol, which tells me that you haven't had a drink for a really long time before you had that, because your body's processed it really quite quickly. And basically, it turned out this person was getting to the point where the only thing that worked was they would walk to the local shop, buy half a bottle of vodka, shotgun it, and go to sleep. And they'd do it every 6 weeks or so. And that was the only time they ever drank. So that isn't even binge drinking. So I said, so what is that helping you to cope with? Because you haven't come in with a drinking problem. You've come in because you need to black something out. That's what we need. That's what we need to get a handle on. And that person, because that was more recent, I actually helped them self-refer to Rock to Recovery. And again, and this person's life was extraordinary. Again, I can't tell you because you'd be able to just go straight on Google and find out who they were if I told you any details. But the trauma that this person had experienced in their professional life was absolutely off the scale extraordinary. So I've gone off at a bit of a tangent now, but yeah, so that was how I started to notice, and I realised I was becoming a bit of a hypocrite because I was seeing all these things in other people, and I was caring for all these people, but I wasn't looking after myself, and my mental state was going down and down and down at the time.
Why?
Just typical of someone who had, I think it was Sammy Ferguson described it as stacked trauma, when it's just one thing after another after another. And I didn't realise that the trauma was coming at home as well. I didn't realise just how abusive a marriage I was in at the time. It's very interesting listening to Hannah Sheargold. It's Sheargold, isn't it?
Sheargold, yeah.
Sheargold talk about covert narcissism, and I was just like, yeah, that was me, and totally brainwashed, completely brainwashed. And I'd got to the point where I just thought I was just there to help other people. I wasn't allowed to be happy. Other people had to be happy before me. He was literally living off me like a parasite. I was going out to work with my diagnosis. I was supposed to be semi-retired at that point.
MS.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was going out to work full-time and more, and working extra hours because he wouldn't get a job, and obviously had to keep the kids fed and clothed. And I was convinced that I was just the worst person in the world. That everyone was better off without me. And I just thought, and my plan was, and this is how bad it was, that I'd actually planned it over a period of time. So, because I needed it to look like an accident so that the kids would get the life insurance. Because my will was sewn up tighter than that's chuff. In terms of...
You just say tighter than a gnat's chuff.
Yeah, sorry.
I just wanted to clarify what you said there. Okay.
Yeah, I do apologise.
Sorry.
You forget that you're actually just...
I don't mind.
Yeah. You forget that you're actually not just talking one-to-one to just another human being.
You said something on the icebreaker as well. There's an expression used in the icebreaker. What was that?
Which one?
Oh, the limo.
Oh, limos and
limousines and
yeah.
Limousines and
sensor lights.
Sensor lights. Limousines are the good people who can carry 8 people along, and sensor lights are the ones who only do any work when someone walks past.
Yeah. And then you've normally got a G spot as well, as somebody you can never find them.
Oh my god. Oh my god. There's a little insight into the nursing.
Oh yeah, nurses are worse than the
speak.
military for nicknames.
I can imagine.
Yeah.
So let's put it back to the serious stuff. You were talking about a gnat's chuff.
Yeah, so I was just absolutely convinced that everyone was way better off without me. Didn't realise how bad I was, and then I'd even got a plan. I knew what drug I needed and what dose I needed, that it would look like an accident, and even where it was going to go, like here, because that's the most likely place you're going to get a needle stick injury on your
So
hand.
the palm of your hand, boy?
Just because...
On the muscle of the thumb there, and the palm of the hand.
Yeah, just sort of there, because, looked like an accident, like a needle stick injury, like you'd gone to grab something, like reflex action. So you thought you were going to drop it, sort of thing. The NHS supply chain changed, and they changed the size of the syringe, so it was too small.
Okay.
And I thought, sorry.
And
I was, a mate of mine rang me the one night, and I was, did he ring me? No, he texted me. And he asked me the question, how are you? And I look back now, and I can't actually have wanted to die. I must have known that it was just this desperate way, absolute ultimate way out of how I was feeling, and how I was so worried about the kids and the future, and how everything was going to sort itself out, because everything looked so bleak. And it was him that said, why don't you go to Rock to Recovery? Because I was actually honest with him, and I said, I'm not good. I said, I'm in a really, really dark place. And I think, would I still be here now if I hadn't actually been completely honest with him? And he'd been a Marine. And he said, why don't you go to Rock to Recovery? And I said, but I don't have a military number. I said, I've never served in the military. I said, I'm NHS. And he said, just tell them your emergency services. He said, they're taking on the emergency services now. He said, just ring them, phone this number and do it now, and let me know you've rung them. And I phoned up, and he said, which service branch are you? And I said, Blue Light, and he just put me straight through, and the rest is history. So, yeah. So that was 2019.
do you think maybe it's not that he didn't you said there that you think maybe he didn't really want to die because you said, yeah, I'm not good, and you opened up on that? Or do you think, I think it's more likely that you wanted to, right? I'm thinking my own perspective as well. You wanted to, but at the same time, something deep in you knows it's wrong. Knows it's wrong, and still hopes that there's some way away from it. I think.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I think you're right.
Because even at that low state, your mental state still peaks and troughs. It's just everything is shite. It's either super dark or super dark.
Yeah.
And when you're super dark, or like really at the bottom, you're not answering the phone.
This is it.
You're not answering the phone.
You don't. And I was convinced the kids were better off without me, and that the only thing I was any good at was my job. And there was me thinking, well, I've got my death in service benefit as well. And it to me, it was a logical plan. And that was what was quite...
It is, but it only makes sense because your perspective of yourself is so skewed.
Exactly.
It's the only reason it makes sense. I've got a few friends who have either been in this state or are in this state. Where they think they're a burden. If I'm just going to generalize like that,
that's
they
how
think
I
they're
felt.
a burden on family, friends, society, and it's only because their perspective on themselves is so skewed because their mental state is not where it should be. Everything they look at seems crap, and because of this situation, all they've got to look at is themselves. They're looking inwardly all the time, and if they're looking inwardly all the time and everything is crap, well, they're crap all the time, which is completely wrong. But
yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It is. It's how your perspective of yourself is so skewed. So then I went to Rock to Recovery. I had my first appointment because it's obviously pre-COVID. Went to up to Manchester. Had face-to-face meeting.
Is that where their HQ is? Isn't it? It's down south, isn't it? The HQ?
Yeah, it's Devon.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure. I couldn't tell you at the moment because they've had a lot of move around because they've had to adapt to COVID. But they used to run clinics at various locations around the UK. And this one, the closest one to me, happened to be Manchester. So I drove up to Manchester. And whilst I wasn't an alcoholic, I was drinking because the trauma was bad. And as soon as I started to get a handle on that, I didn't need to drink anymore. That was when I stopped drinking. And when I started to handle the trauma and basically improve my view of myself and feel a lot better, that was when the marriage went down the pan, because I wasn't just serving his purposes anymore. Didn't realise it at the time, but I'll come on to that sort of later on. But it was the best thing that ever happened, him leaving. But it didn't feel like it at the time for about 2 weeks, and then it was just like me and the kids sat down one day and we went, bloody hell, someone put diazepam in the water, because everyone was just so chilled.
So they were so what? Chilled?
Yeah. We all were. We just looked at each other and went, blimey, this is really nice. Yeah. It was just amazing. Yeah. But no, I think what were you going to say?
I was going to ask, I don't know if you want to venture down the road, right, but you mentioned Hannah Shergold. So Hannah spoke about like a bad relationship, right?
Yeah.
Narcissistic individual, and getting trapped in that.
Yeah.
And you just mentioned it. But how does it become that situation? Like, how do you get trapped in it? How does that situation manifest itself to allow yourself to get into that situation?
Well, for me, and this is why I think it's quite an important message today. So when you listen to people like Hannah talk, for example, people who've had, like, I know it sounds like a one-off relationship where they're very, what should I say, where they become manipulated by one individual. They've got a normal to go back to afterwards, after it's all over. It takes a lot of work because your thinking, your perspective is completely skewed. But to me, that was my normal, because that was how I was brought up. Because and this is what I was alluding to earlier, and why that last icebreaker question hit me like a cricket bat between the eyes, was I was systematically abused by the 4 adults in my house from the time I was born, basically. So we have my mother and my father and my aunt and my uncle lived in the house. My grandmother did as well. She was amazing, but she was as trapped by arthritis as I was by being a kid and being young.
Were you the only kid there?
Yeah, only child. And my mother is thought to have narcissistic personality disorder, very, very extreme, and they call it FDIA now, which is factitious disorder inflicted on another. It used to be Munchausen's.
I didn't think they were diagnosing it in the UK. I read something recently where they don't in fact, it's after the Hannah Shergold 184, where I read that they diagnose it in America, but they don't diagnose people with narcissistic personality disorder in the UK. Am I wrong there?
It's not so much they don't diagnose it, it's because people, and this is just a thought, because of the things that she's actually done. She's now come in, because the criminal things that she's done as a result of not realising and having literally no accountability for her own behaviour. She's off with the fairies, basically. I shouldn't say that.
Is that your professional diagnosis?
Yes.
Yeah. Go on, I know what you mean.
But yeah, she. It tends to be that people. It's not that we don't diagnose. It's just that they never present because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. It's the people around them that drop like flies. So if somebody went to you and said, I'm doing this to my relatives and that to my relatives, but people with narcissistic personality disorder, it can't be a disorder until it's diagnosed. So, and people don't get diagnosed because But I think in some parts of the state, some forms of behaviour are criminalised much more readily than they are in the UK, which is why they come into, I think it's more common that people come into services in the States and are diagnosed against their will. So I think that's why it happens in the States, because it depends on which state it is as to what their their mental health laws are. But with the FDIA, which used to be called Munchausen's by proxy, it sort of it doesn't always manifest itself as somebody making you ill to get attention of healthcare professionals. It can be making a child ill in order just to get sympathy from anybody. So I never went to the doctors as a child, and she used to physically assault me, and she'd from when I can remember until I was too big for her and too heavy for her to do it, she'd get me by the elbow, and she would, and this goes back to the brain injuries that you know, the TBIs that Mandy was talking about, was she'd get me by the elbow and she'd shake me, and of course there's no, if you block someone's hinge, they've got nowhere to go. There's no shock absorption. And she'd always do it close to a wall, and I can remember my head just snapping backwards and forwards. I can remember the pain. I can remember feeling my brain hitting the inside of my skull. And then she'd punch or kick me on the way back to... How
old were you when you first started that?
About the first time I remember, I was about 2 or 3. And that went on until... until I was about 9 or 10, when I was too big for her to do it. And it was like weekly. It was like weekly, and she'd scream at my father, you know, why do I have to put up with this? You know, she's so evil, she's horrible, she's... and my dad would just trot around her like this, like little lapdog, because he was so frightened of her. And she used to give me bottles of Calpol with the lid off and tell me it was sweeties. I shouldn't be here. I should not be here. I think the worst...
Why was she doing that? Just to make you ill?
Not so much to make me ill, but it was frustration, because she didn't want a child. And she told me numerous times that she wished she'd aborted me, that she wished she'd never had children. She only had children because my father wanted a baby. And I think that's one of the reasons one of the reasons my dad was the way he was he felt she made him feel guilty for inflicting me on her. And basically making it easy for other people to abuse me. So I was sexually abused by my aunt and my uncle as well in the same house, but I'll leave that at that. But yeah, it was she just didn't care what happened to me. So it was either she would she wouldn't actually do anything that would directly look like a criminal act, but if she could have gotten away with me accidentally, in inverted commas, dying, that would have been great. And it wasn't that she hated me, she just hated being a pet, having this tie. You know, she just wanted all of the sympathy that would have gone with being the parent with the dead child. She would have had this all of this sympathy forever,
and not have to deal with the child again.
Yeah. And that's what she wanted. She wanted this constant stream of sympathy from being the woman that had the dead kid.
How do you know that was what she think?
To be honest, it's just an assumption. But she just treated me. I was an object who had to reflect to the world how she wanted to be seen. I wasn't a person. I was known as the kid. I was never called by my name. For most of my life. To the point that somebody that...
But all of them?
Yeah. Apart from my grandmother.
Was your gran in the same house?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my grandmother used to stand up to my parents. My mother used to tell this story of how when I was 10 months old, she bit me, and it was my fault for screaming so loudly. And she drew blood. And there was like, my grandmother, in her arthritic state, tried to, intervene and went absolutely berserk and up the wall. And took me off her and said, you can't do this. And it was me and my grandmother, me at 10 months old, this is how screwed up she was, that were in the wrong for questioning what an amazing person she was. It's absolutely bizarre. But I was known by everyone in the house as the kid, to the point that when I was in my 30s, somebody that my dad had known for forever, who'd known me since I was a child, actually turned around and said, I don't actually know what your daughter's name is.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Was your gran, I take it she was on your dad's side?
She was my dad's mother.
Yeah.
Yeah, and my aunt's mother.
I can imagine that your gran and your mother's side would also maybe been a piece of work.
I think it was her grandmother, because my maternal grandmother died when my mother was born, and I think that probably had a lot to do with the fact that she was never nurtured. So, it's
like, it's one thing to grow up with one lunatic. Right, I'm obviously using that word very generally in terms of what that can mean. Right?
For
like,
maniac.
Yeah, and then you got your dad, who is, well, helpless for a bunch of reasons, right?
Yeah.
And then you got the other two, your aunt and your uncle. Like, to have three people there who I describe elements of evil about them, right, in the same house to bring about that situation. How on earth does something like that happen? Like, what is going on? Because, so the aunt and the uncle, was it, which one of them is connected to your mum? The uncle or the aunt?
Neither. My aunt was my dad's sister.
Okay, right. Because what I'm getting at, not what I'm trying to get at. See, what I'm thinking is this all like a family bloodline thing with your mum? But it's not, because they were different people. They're not all. But
I think my aunt.
So I'm trying to work out where it all comes from. It's just horrific.
Yeah.
What builds these kind of people? How does it come about?
Well, I always said my aunt was she was quite a bit older than my father and basically brought him up, and she was the same as my mother. And I always used to simplify it by saying because my father was so downtrodden and not miserable. But he was always the joker. He was so emasculated. He was just, and I think my mother was his normal because of how my aunt was all the time. She was absolutely evil. She was. She when she wasn't getting enough attention in the lead up to my parents getting married, because she wasn't the centre of attention because there was a wedding in the offing. She had his dog put down when he was at work. Yeah, and then my dad went absolutely mental, and as you would, and he was the one in the wrong for being so horrible to her and basically wanting to scratch her eyes out because she'd had his dog put down while he was at work. But he was the one in the wrong because of how he'd reacted. So that just tells you everything about the dynamic in the house of what these people like and what my dad had normalised. But ultimately, I blame my dad because he was the adult and he was the one that was supposedly sane and normal, and he was the one that offered me up on a plate with a fucking bow round my neck because it saved him. And years later, when I had my own children, I couldn't tolerate it anymore because I just thought, this isn't normal. All the things that I've been told that are normal, unfortunately, I am normal. How? I don't know, given everything that sort of happened along the way. But my father, after my mother had actually committed a criminal act and was prevented from coming anywhere near me and my kids. And that was social services and the police that had intervened, and that was taken out of my hands because of something that she had done. My father still desperately wanted me to be to blame because that would make it all okay. And he came to my house the one day with a black eye because without me around as this meat shield, she'd turned on him. And I can remember he stood there with a black eye, berating me, saying, "What do you think you've achieved by taking your mother to court?" And I said, "It's not me. I wasn't even there. Just because you're not allowed near us, or she's not allowed near us, doesn't mean that we had anything to do with it. You know, you can't hold other people accountable for the consequences of your actions. You know, nobody can be accountable other than you for the things that you've done. You can put it right. There is so much you can do to put these things right." And he was still going on and on at me about all of the things that I'd supposedly done. And I'd had to write a statement for the court about the things that my mother had done to me.
Throughout your life?
Yeah. And she, before the order was put in place, because she was presented with it, and obviously because she'd got the emotional age of a 5-year-old, she couldn't cope. So her and my father and my ex-husband had actually sat the children down when I wasn't there. Their father had had them for the weekend, sat them down and made them read this statement while my mother sat there crying, calling me a liar, and the kids just looked at it and went, "Well, she's done it to Mum as well." Never wanted to see her again. They were absolutely terrified, and they haven't seen her since. So they knew, and at this time that my father came round to my house and was berating me, all the children were there. And my then fiance, and he said, and I can't remember, because I blacked a lot of it out, but in front of the children, the conversation segued, and I said, "Hang on a minute, so you knew what she was doing to me? You knew how bad it was, you knew how bad the abuse was and what she was letting other people do to me, and you did nothing to make me safe, you did nothing to take me out of that situation and protect me. You're my dad. You know, you were meant to love me." And he went, "Well, you know what she could be like, you just wind her up. My life was all right. I took her out for an hour once in a while, didn't I?" And it was my oldest that got him by the elbow and said, "I'm sorry, but nobody speaks to my mother like that," and showed him the door.
Just a different reality, isn't it? It's people
Yeah.
living in a different reality,
Yeah.
and unfortunately, at the expense of other people, which in this case, at the worst, was yourself.
Yeah.
When you're living in a house with 4 adults as a kid like that,
Yeah.
going on the receiving end of all the worst kind of abuse you can think of, what's your coping mechanisms, and what are your coping mechanisms, right? And two, at what point, as you get older, you start realizing this isn't fucking right as a kid?
Well, because of my grandmother, I realised really early on, and I think that's what saved me, to be honest, because I always saw it coming, because I knew that she wasn't right, because I had this example of unconditional love, and I wasn't going to bother getting my PTSD formally diagnosed, but when I had to, I was actually diagnosed with PTSD as opposed to complex PTSD, and that was put down to the fact that I had the relationship I did with my grandmother. So for me, it was a lot of magical thinking. I used to read a lot. I used to go inside my imagination an awful lot, which is really, really common for, I've since discovered, for abused kids. And just magical thinking, it's not lying or anything like that.
So what do you mean?
It's literally, you just create another reality.
A happy reality.
Yeah.
That you can pretend to be in.
Yeah. Yeah. When your bedroom door's shut, you can just be like, you can pretend it's different, and it is. But it's that, but going back to the reason, I thought, oh shoot, sorry, I keep doing that, I keep catching the bottom of the microphone, sorry. But when you But when I was listening to Mandy talk, and I thought, because part of it is about that sort of alternate reality, with PTSD, for example, it's in your mind, and your mind is controlling your physical processes. So that magical thinking was sort of part of that, and I was able to sort of adapt that when I did my work with Rock to Recovery. I'm just stopping for a sec to segue back. That's the MS. Sometimes I lose track of what I'm saying. I lose the end of a sentence before I get to the middle of it.
I always do it all. I do it all the time, and I haven't got MS, so you're fine. You've got an excuse. I haven't.
But yeah. So there's, what was I saying? Yeah. So it's the magical thinking. But what I was thinking in terms of the relevance for the podcast is, what it does make us very good at is problem solving, thinking on our feet, pushing forward. And of course, we've stared death in the face that many times. I mean, one really obvious one was, we were on holiday in Cornwall, and it was about the couple of nights before we left. Each night, my mother had been for a walk on her own, and there was like a cliff walk, a walk along the cliff path either way. And I think I was about 9 or 10. And the next day, the one day, I think it was like the Thursday, and we were meant to go home on the Saturday. She said, let's all go for a walk along the cliff path. And I was like, that almost sounded like a mum thing to say. Maybe things are changing, and I'm going to get the mum I've always wanted. And I remember really playing up to her and chatting to her, and she went, let's have a race. And I was like, wow, this is like mother-daughter stuff, and we're actually having a conversation. I was like, yeah, of course I will. And anyway, she said, what we'll do, she said, you see that bench all the way up there? She said, we'll have a race up there, and she said, we'll see which one of us can get to it first. And I remember thinking, I wonder if she's going to slow down and let me win. And she said, so you take the left-hand fork, and I'll take the right-hand fork, and just run as fast as you can, and we'll run up to that bench up there. And I remember I started to run, and then she started to slow down. It was all in the gorse. You couldn't see this path. And I remember my little legs, my arms like barreling away as I ran up this path, thinking I'm really going to beat her, and then we're going to have this amazing bonding experience when we get to the bench. And I went through these gorse bushes, and all of a sudden it just opened up, and the path just disappeared. And there was a sheer drop down onto, like, off a cliff. And I remember, because it was dry, because it was sunny, and I remember like trying to run backwards and my feet skidding, and I landed with my bum just on the cliff edge and my legs over, lying on my back. And I remember thinking, right, okay, what do I do? So I can't see anything, so I'll flip onto my stomach. So I went onto my stomach, and I couldn't see anything to grab onto, so I literally just went to stick my hands in the dirt to pull myself forward. And I looked up, and my mother was stood about 6 feet away from me. And I remember I put my hand out to her thinking, she's my mum and I'm about to fall off a cliff. And she just looked at me, turned around and walked away.
Oh my God.
And I remember thinking, shit. Okay. So I remember like shuffling.
How old were you here?
I was about 10. Yeah, I was about 10. 9 or 10. So of course, what does that teach you as a child? You know, everybody's dangerous, and if you ask for help, it's even more dangerous. And you get rejected at the time in your life when you need help more than any other. You can't ask for it because you'll be rejected, you'll be abandoned, you'll be betrayed if you ask for help. So there was, and then it was my fault for ruining the rest of the holiday because she was in such a bad mood. Just like, okay. Oh, and the other one was my 8th birthday card, which everyone thought was absolutely hilarious. It said, happy 8th birthday, you better behave, you might not see 9. Now, to me, that was just, I was constantly told I couldn't behave, that I was evil, that I was horrible, that I was selfish, I was demanding. No matter what I did, the goalposts moved. I couldn't do anything right. So for me, I just thought, well, I'm not going to see 9 because I can't behave. And she's tried to kill me God knows how many times, or let me perish. Yeah, I remember I went into anaphylactic shock when I was about 18, and she was a nurse, my mother, and she put me back in my bedroom. And her face the next morning when I walked out of my bedroom.
18?
Yeah, I was about 18 or 19. Yeah, and I'd gone into the nettle rash that we see. It looks like nettle rash, but it like spreads all over the body and then it all joins up. And then, you get it in the inside of your mouth and your throat. And I remember I just took like a handful of Piriton because it was so itchy, no other reason. So I probably took a massive dose of Piriton, which is what saved my life. And yeah, the next morning, so she'd obviously expected me to die in my sleep. But anyway, you were asking me about how do you...
What the coping mechanisms?
The coping mechanisms, which it's more the magical thinking, and you get very, very good, and this is why I was so good at my job, and other people who've had this kind of childhood trauma are so good if they go into the emergency services or the military, because when you've had any kind of experience like that, you have to be so good at reading people, because I would have to get up in the morning and I would have to judge what mood she was in, what she was feeling, how she looked, the look on her face, her body language, everything, to see how my day was going to pan out. If I was going to stay alive, I had to be one step ahead of her emotions. And it always used to be a standing joke at work: send Sam in because she'll tell you if they're going to die in the next 10 minutes. Or, send Sam in and she'll tell you what's wrong with them, because I could just spot what was wrong with people from 50 paces, because I'd had to analyse and assess and prepare every single day when I got up in the morning for how she was going to be that day, and what person did I have to be. So I used to have to adapt myself. So that's the other thing, we're people pleasers. We completely subjugate our own needs, so that basically, and it's a survival mechanism, because if you can please other people, they don't attack you. So with these really amenable kids, we've always got a smile on our face, because I was never, and that's the other thing, you're never allowed to feel anything. You're only allowed to project happiness. So even until really, really recently, and I think when I come on to not what caused my PTSD, but what actually triggered my spiral down into PTSD, I look back now, and I was dealing with situations. It was so busy in A&E that day, and I was running the shift, and I was working clinically, clinically running the shift, should I say, because there's two different ways you run a shift. You've got your clinical nurses, and you've got your sort of management side who are doing all your ambulances and everything else. So we had I was the clinical lead on the shift. I was working in resus, and we had but that day I realised now I was in a full-blown panic attack, and I couldn't even label my own emotions, because even at that age I had never been able to never been allowed to feel anything other than happy, or project to the world that I was happy. I was never allowed to say that I was sad, or I was emotional, or I wanted to cry, or I was enjoying myself. Even like positive emotions, it was just like it had to reflect how they wanted to be seen by the world. So you're not very good at, and we've all got that one work colleague, haven't we, that you see that you're on with them and you just like, thank God for that, because they're bloody brilliant. But their life is a car crash outside work. Well, I was that person. Rubbish relationships, but there for everybody else. Everyone, the limo, that was me. Used to carry everyone, and everyone loved me for it. But yeah. So when I met my first husband, to me that was normal. So he was...
I was a narcissist.
Yeah. Because it was what I was used to. It was all I deserved. It was what I expected. I shouldn't expect anything else, really. So as much as I wanted a nice relationship that was 50-50 and everything else, I thought that's what I was getting, because it's like Hannah explained, in the beginning, they mirror everything that you say. So they mirror back at you your values, your beliefs. So you think you've met this real soulmate, and then there's this slow decline. And then it's like this chipping away at your self-confidence and your self-esteem, you just feel so ugly and worthless, and they'll chip away at your looks, they'll chip away at your personality, everything about you is wrong. And when my eldest was born, that was when he really turned, and he was a nightmare. He was a really horrible person. Why
did it turn then?
Not entirely sure. There's a woman called Pat Craven who wrote a book called Living with the Dominator about these guys and women, but it tends to be blokes that do the more damage. And they... Sorry, what was the question again?
Oh shit! What was the question? Oh my God!
No, you said about why was that? You asked about why did he change when my eldest was born?
Sorry,
and it's very, very common, very, very common, because suddenly your attention is taken away from them and onto this baby, and it's very, very common for these types of people to turn when a baby's born. So,
interesting.
Yeah, and then when he always used to get quite depressed. So he had 3 in 3 years. He used to get quite depressed around the time the clocks went back. And then after my middle son was born, 18 months later, in the October, he went downhill, but he never came back up again. And then my third son was born in 18 months later in the April, and he was in this full-blown rage by then. So I was having this mental illness. I was having to lock myself and the boys, this is when I was still pregnant, in the bedroom at night because I was just so frightened of him. And then
was he physically abusive?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But only to me. And when my youngest was about 3 weeks old, he had a complete... The one night he'd been somewhere, didn't know where, and he was just raging. And I remember I'd put the boys to bed. So obviously Rory was only tiny. And he came back in the house from wherever he'd been, and I remember he was white with anger, absolutely white with anger. And I remember backing away from him and thinking, he's not going to back off. Thinking, oh God. They always teach this in nursing school. Psych patients never let the patient between you and the door. And I was so I was kicking myself because I got no way out, and I was literally cornered in the kitchen. And I remember thinking, right, okay. I remember planting my feet, and I remember looking at the knife block and thinking, shit, it's empty. And then I remember thinking, okay, I'm going to go down fighting. How long is it going to last? How much is it going to hurt? And how long is it going to hurt for? But I'm not going down without a fight. But worst of all was thinking, what is going to happen to the boys when the lights go out and I'm not here to protect them? And I just went for it, and he stopped. And I took the boys and I left, because I wasn't putting up with that. And so we just walked out of that situation. I got myself a fantastic job. I didn't want to work full time because I got a tiny baby. I just wanted to be a mum. But needs must. So got a really good job with good people. Worked in clinical teaching for quite a while, which works. It was 9 to 5, so it was a bit easier. But my heart was always in emergency nursing. And then just worked myself up, got a really nice house for me and the boys. And then I think my youngest was about 6 or 7 when I met my second husband. But again, didn't... Oh, Nicholas, I keep doing that.
Don't worry about it. Sorry.
Yeah. That's my work swear word, that is.
It comes through when you knock the microphone. It comes through loud on the headphones. It doesn't...
Oh, that's all right then.
So when people listen back to this, they're not hearing you clang the microphone.
Oh, that's
It's just
okay.
shocking for you.
Yeah.
It does come through loud on the headphones, doesn't it? Yeah.
But
Can we come back a bit?
Yeah.
Sorry. So when you were growing up, you mentioned that the abuse at home tailed off a lot when you got to about 10 years old, just because you were getting bigger and it's physically bigger, and so it's difficult for them to control you, right? As a child's getting bigger. But then you also mentioned that you were still there, I think, when you were 18. What was that relationship like with your parents, with your uncle and auntie through that really significant period of your adolescence there, going up to 18? What was that like living there?
Oh, that was all emotional abuse then. When they couldn't physically abuse me, it was emotional abuse. So they used to tell me that I looked like a whore and a slut and a prostitute, and it was just all of that kind of, and I was a horrible,
constant negativity.
And I was a horrible person. I was stupid. I'd never come to anything. Yeah, it was just, I'd pretty much moved, because my parents and I had moved away at that point. So I'd actually moved in with my grandmother when I was 16. So, but there were times when I had to go back, which was like the anaphylaxis episode, for example. But yeah, it was that constant. So you never had a safe place to go to. You never had any emotional safety. You never had any physical safety. So I think the difference between, say, myself, and this is why it's so significant how I've dealt with that trauma and the toolkit I've got in place for myself now, compared to somebody, and I'm not belittling it, but somebody who has had one very negative, say, narcissistic romantic relationship, who hasn't had any childhood trauma, has got that template of emotional healthiness,
of
for once, of normality, that emotional and mental good health to go back to, whereas I didn't. So when I met my second husband, again, I didn't know any better, and I got somebody who was saying that they were the best parent in the world and mirroring all my values and beliefs back to me, and me thinking, thank goodness, I can relax now. And then it was, and again, when Mandy was talking about how when trauma isn't processed and it isn't expressed outwards, there's no outlet for it, and those stress processes are constantly running, you end up with autoimmune disorders and diseases. So of course, I had some weird symptoms. I was at work the one day, sat at my desk. I thought I was having a stroke. Typical, took myself off to A&E. And I got there and I knew the consultant and she was so lovely to me. And she said, they did my bloods and she said, I've booked you in for an MRI scan next week. She said, we're going to do a CT scan now. Booked you in for an MRI and booked you in to see the neurologist next week, but I think everything's okay. So anyway, as they took me into CT, this radiographer comes running out. She went, are you Sam? I said, yes, I am. She said, we've just had a cancellation. We're going to do your MRI now as an emergency. So I had an MRI while I was in A&E, which is almost unheard of. So they did this emergency MRI scan. And anyway, the consultant came up to me she said, your bloods are fine. She said, I'm just going to have a look at your MRI and then I'll be back I won't be very long at all. And she said, and then you can go home. And a mate of mine had said he'd come and pick me up because I was feeling a bit shaken up. Anyway, 2 hours later, she still wasn't back. And A&E was like a ghost town. I'd never seen it as quiet as it was that day. And so I knew something wasn't right. And it was just before my mate got there to pick me up. So I was on my own and she walked in the cubicle, she shut the curtains. And she took my hand and she went, I know you, I'm going to give it to you cold. She went, your brain scan's abnormal. It's not a tumour. It's demyelination. And that was just, I went, oh my God, that's worse. And
demyelination.
Yeah, so that means that the coating of the nerves is coming away. So if you imagine you've got a standard lamp on your floor and there's a wire running to the socket. So you flick it on at the socket and the bulb comes on. Yeah, so it lights up. Now, if you go and hack a big hole out of that insulating cable, so the wires are exposed, you'll turn the lamp on, you'll turn it on at the wall and it'll burn a hole in your carpet and the bulb won't come on. That's basically what MS is. So the myelin sheath, which is the insulating cable around your nerves, is attacked by your nervous system so that your nerves fire off in the wrong directions.
I've never really explained it that. I've got a friend locally, actually,
yeah.
who she's really one of my girlfriend's best friends, called Anna, and she's got MS.
Yeah.
And she posts about it a lot. And I've never really understood the mechanics of what it is.
Yeah.
To sort of understand what she's going through, because MS is a difficult one, I think, for me to understand, in that because for some people it's really debilitating, for others it's not, but it's also a progressive disease, right?
Yeah.
So it just gets worse and worse and worse and worse. But until you'd explained that to me then, the way that is, I'd not realised. So MS is primarily affects then the nervous system, the nerves, all over the body.
Yeah. Yeah, so it attacks your brain and your central nervous system.
What brings it on?
They don't know, to be honest.
So for you, it could have been... So for you, talking about your autoimmune response to trauma, it could very well be a product of that all that trauma in the past, your autoimmune system being compromised and leading on to something like MS. Yeah,
probably.
And for other people, it can just come out of the blue.
Yeah.
Other people just get the shit end of the stick.
Yeah. And I remember I was... it was a few months after that.
When did you get diagnosed? Sorry.
So I was diagnosed a few months later because...
How long ago was this?
2016 I was diagnosed. Okay. And I remember I didn't tell the boys for ages because as much as you wanted a normal life, you know, you'd got these two mad people, my parents, in the background being just... trying to use us to create this perfect life that they wanted, and we were trying to conduct our normal lives and just go about life the way it should be. It got very, very stressful because suddenly my mother couldn't be centre of attention, and that was when it got really bad, and that was when she started the sort of criminal behaviour started, which she didn't realise was criminal because, you know, my father had just facilitated her all her life.
What do you mean criminal?
She attacked two of my children. Yeah, and I didn't know until I was called down to the school.
Physically attacked them?
Yeah.
While they were at home?
Yeah, but I'd been at work and because I desperately wanted a relationship with my dad, and I fooled myself for a really long time that my dad was a good guy and he'd come through for me in the end, and I'd be a daddy's girl, which I'm still grieving for that, if I'm honest. I don't think that's something I'll ever completely get over. My own dad actually rejecting me to my face is something I don't think...
I've got daughters, you can see...
Yeah.
You can see
Sorry.
well enough. No. Because I can imagine... got the thought of them having me...
Yeah.
Not that I'm the greatest dad in the world, but the thought of them having a complete arsehole, complete bastard instead of me, like the impact on them growing up that would be, and how sad that must be.
Yeah.
So I'm crying for you, really.
Do you want tissue?
No, I don't.
I've always got loads on my book.
Don't.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's all right. Go on.
I feel really bad. Yeah, so...
It's not the first time.
No, I know. So, yeah, but we'll skim over that. But
No, it's fine. You go. Don't
No,
worry.
it wasn't that at all. It was more coming on to... So I threw myself into work, and I threw myself into like real physical fitness because it did make me feel better. And I think it didn't help as well. I went onto autopilot. So I had my diagnosis on the Tuesday, and the Wednesday I went into work, and they said, we're not anticipating a massive rush because it was May, so there's no winter pressures or anything. And we're fully staffed today, and they've just phoned up to say one of the other wards, they haven't got enough staff. Does anyone want to go? And I just thought, I don't want to talk about what happened yesterday. I don't want to see my mates. I don't want to talk to anyone. I'll go. So I went up to this other ward, and I got there, and it was the neuro ward. And I thought, oh, shit. And they gave me this bay of 6 patients to look after. 5 of the 6 bed-bound patients I was caring for had multiple sclerosis, and 4 of them were tube-fed. And this was the day after I was diagnosed. And I was like, oh my God. Oh, you couldn't make it up, could you? You could not make it up. So yeah, anyway, I threw myself into getting really fit. And I could feel myself unravelling.
Because 2016 you said you got diagnosed. I'm sure that's about the same year Anna was diagnosed as well, just by coincidence.
Is it?
Yeah, it's around about the same time, sure it was. Yeah, yeah, sure it was. Yeah, or just before 2015 maybe. Anyway, sorry.
Yeah. And so is that your girlfriend's
Best
mate?
mate, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I've heard you talk about her before, I'm sure.
No, I've not mentioned it before. I've not had anyone on the podcast to discuss MS before, but I know about Anna's MS, obviously, because she's a friend. I say she's a friend. I don't see her very often, only because life.
Oh, Anna.
Anna, yeah.
I thought you said Hannah. I know. I've heard somebody talk recently about someone called Hannah with MS, so that was why I was making the wrong connection.
Sorry. No,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So I suppose it's that trauma that Mandy talked about, isn't it? Of you've got this diagnosis, and you're constantly adapting, and I was offered pretty much straight away. I was offered something called Lemtrada, which is a form of chemotherapy, and it's the gold standard. There's nothing else that you can have, and it basically wipes out your immune system temporarily, so it gets rid of the antibodies that attack your brain and your central nervous system, which is why I don't eat meat anymore. I don't do the things that will replace the antibodies, and there's this really good plan called the Overcoming Multiple Sclerosis plan, which I'll talk about in a sec. But so where was I keep doing this, don't I?
Are you talking about coping with MS?
Yeah, so I was doing all of the right things, eating the right food. Had my first. Did I have my first round of chemo by then? No, it's before my first round of chemo. But I was offered this chemo, and most people are offered it sort of 4th or 5th line when they're really, really bad. And I remember saying to the MS nurses, why have I been offered this now? And she said, well, it's one of those questions, we only answer it honestly if we're asked the question outright. She said, but basically it's because of where it is in your brain. She said, so that's the thing for me, is I know that when secondary progressive MS hits, which is why I work so hard to keep it at bay, that it will be a bit more like motor neurone disease because of where the lesions are in my brain. So
where in the brain is it?
Quite close to my brainstem.
Okay.
So I'll lose my mobility and I'll lose my speech and then I'll lose my swallow. So when I do go, it'll be pneumonia because I won't be able to stop stuff going into my lungs. So yeah, it's that's why I work.
Are you able to stop the progress of the MS?
And that's what that's what I'm working so hard at now. Yeah, it's keeping it at bay. Yeah, so I was booked in for my chemo. So I'd got all of this like stacked trauma. So I'd got what had happened with the children, and just how catastrophic that had been. So that was really traumatic, and obviously the diagnosis had been traumatic, and trying to deal with spin all these plates basically of dealing with the diagnosis and how I was going to deal with it going forward. And you'd wake up in the morning and you'd think, oh my God, does this mean, and then it turned out you just slept on your arm. But do you know what I mean? It's that fear.
Waking up with a numb arm and thinking it's
yeah,
progressed.
oh my God. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's those mini traumas that are stacking on top of everything. And I was in work the one day, and like I say, I was clinical lead on the shift. I was working, and I was stood by the nurses' station, and I heard these footsteps come through the ambulance doors. And normally there's a load of clatter because it's paramedics with someone on a trolley, but it was literally just panicked footsteps came through the ambulance doors. And I turned round, I've got a student nurse with me, and I said, I looked at this girl, and she got this little boy in her arms, and he'd got a little cut just here above his eye, and it was
on his eyelid.
Yeah, just in the crease of his eye on the right, just sort of quite close to his nose, and I was a bit smug at first because I just thought, oh bless her, she's panicking. He's run into a table, because toddler versus table, sort of facial injuries is really, really common. And I'd got my student nurse with me, and obviously I didn't want her to panic. So I thought, oh, come on, sweetheart. So I went and sat her down in a cubicle, and I was rubbing her back, and I was going, look, these things happen all the time. Tell me what's happened, and we'll sort him out. And
this is the mum.
This is the mum. I'm talking to the mum, and I've got my student nurse stood next to me, and I went, tell me what's happened. And she looked at me, and I could feel that the hair on my arms was standing on end. And I was like, why is this? Something's not right. And on the back of my neck, you get that icy feeling down the middle of your shoulder blades. I'm thinking, something's really not right here. And this mum, she looked at me, and she's got this little boy, and he started to go a bit quiet. He was screaming his head off when he came in. I was just like, oh God, something's really wrong here. And I said, come on, tell me what's happened. She went, he's been shot.
Shot?
I went, sorry? She went, he's been shot. And I said, and that's what that wound is on his eye? She went, yes. I remember, when everything slows down, you get that tunnel vision, and just everything for a split second stops. And then everything speeds up again, and you're like, oh my God. So I just went, and I remember saying to the student nurse, I said, right, I want 5 milligrams of diamorphine, and 1 ml syringe, a nasal cannula, 5 mils of water for injection, and the most senior doctor you can find.
Was it a pellet gun, was it?
No.
What was it, a 22 or something? Yeah. A proper 22 rifle. Oh my God.
And so then we managed to deal with this little boy, and he's our priority because we're clinicians. And then all of a sudden it twigs. And I said, you ran here. I said, where have you come from? She said, we live just over the road. So I was just like, oh my God, I've got a maniac with a rifle who hasn't thought anything about putting a bullet in his own kid, wandering around within walking distance of the hospital. So then we had to sort of like declare a major incident and shut all the entrances down. Police were notified. But because I was doing my job, I was all right at that point. But because there was a firearm involved and I had to phone the police, and because it was a minor, I obviously had to phone social services. And when I phoned social services, I had a on-call social worker, and it was her first. She was newly qualified, and it was her first day on her own. And when I explained what had happened, I heard this poor girl on the end of the phone go into shock. And you know when you're on your own and you've got somebody on the end of the phone, you just don't want them to hang up. And you could tell she was like pleading with me, don't hang up because I don't know how to cope with this, and in her panic to keep me on the phone, she read this, because she'd obviously got it on the computer in front of me, she read this family's entire rap sheet with social services. Oh, no. And it was everything you can imagine. And I just remember, I just went, I know what it's like to be this kid trapped in this house knowing that help isn't coming. And it was his brothers and sisters as well. It wasn't just this kid. And I just thought, and that was what, and it was literally like this. I describe it like a concrete bunker inside my head. All of the trauma, everything, I'd packed it all away, and I just felt the walls crumble, and I couldn't build it back up. I couldn't put it together. And I realise now that I went into full-blown panic, but I didn't know because I couldn't label my own feelings, and I didn't know what I was feeling. I just had to carry on and please everyone else around me. So I dealt with that situation. And about 2 hours later, I had a young girl come in who was, she was miscarrying, and she was only a teenager, and she'd got this lovely family, and her and her boyfriend, her young boyfriend, had made a bit of a mistake, but the family's attitude was, we don't care, we've got a baby on the way, we're going to make the most of it. They sorted out this couple's living arrangements. They were looking after both they were making sure that they could both still go to school, they could go to university, and they were actually really looking forward to this baby. And all they cared about was that she was okay. That was all. This entire family, his parents, her parents and grandparents, everyone was there. And I remember just standing there in resus, and I couldn't label how I felt, but I just felt totally overwhelmed because I was stood in a room with all this love and support that I'd never ever had. 3 hours earlier, I'd been back in my childhood bedroom waiting for help that I knew was never going to come, like that little boy. And then I was confronted with something I'd never had that I desperately wanted, and it just completely broke me. I was never the same after that day. I just wasn't, just never the same after that day. And that was when I look back, and like I say, my second husband, who I was with then, totally unsympathetic because it wasn't about him. You know, I didn't have anyone to talk to. I didn't have anyone to offload to. I didn't have anyone to say, this is how you should feel. This is normal. And that was when I started to sort of decline into this negative thinking about myself, you know, this feeling of total worthlessness.
Well, after that day?
Yeah. I can actually...
Because you went back, so you went back kind of in memory to experiencing the bad times, and you saw what you could have had, should have had.
Yeah.
With that amazing family wanting to look after the daughter.
Yeah.
And then you went downhill from there.
Yeah. It was literally those...
But because of a lack of self-worth, you're blaming yourself.
No, it was literally like those two total extremes. I couldn't cope. My nervous system just could not cope with those two complete extremes.
Yeah.
You know, what I did have, I was presented what I did have, and like you say, what I should have had within the space of 3 or 4 hours. And I just wasn't the same after that. And that was when it sort of spiralled down, or I spiraled down, and it was just this loss of self-worth, this, typical symptoms: crying, uncontrollable crying, feeling that I wasn't worth being around my kids, that they'd be better off without me, because poor self-care. And I remember it almost got to the point where I just thought, well, he clearly knows that I'm not worth it, because surely he'd be acting differently if I was. So it was. So, for example, I had to have a second round of chemotherapy, and at the time, we'd moved, so I was doing agency and bank work rather than contracted.
Bank work?
It's basically, every hospital will have a staff bank that they dip into. So you don't have a permanent contract, but you're still in the NHS, so it meant I could keep my pension. So I was doing bank and agency in A&E, but if I didn't work, I didn't get paid. So I went to get my second round of chemo, you wouldn't get a job. So I should have had 3 months off when I had each round of chemo, and the second one I had 2 weeks, because we had no money coming in, and he wouldn't go and get a job. So I had to get out of bed after chemo and go out and earn money 2 weeks after. And that's the point at which I should have gone, there's something really wrong here. But my self-esteem and my self-worth was so low, I actually blamed myself for the situation. And then a few months...
Full time after 2 weeks. I've got a friend who's not long off the back of a bunch of different chemotherapy, courses over the last year. I think his last one was maybe 11 months ago. I spoke to him a month ago, and he's still only in work 2 or 3 days a week now, as opposed to 5 days a week. Just to put it in perspective for people who don't understand, going back to work full time after just 2 weeks of chemo.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
And
dangerous as well.
Yeah,
dangerous as well, right?
Because I was immunocompromised.
Yeah, exactly.
And then a few months after that, I had a miscarriage, and again I was in hospital for a week. Luckily, my own hospital, so I was amongst friends, which was nice. But I was in hospital for a week, so I was really ill. I nearly bled to death. And then 5 days after I got out of hospital, I was back at work. And again, it was just that sense of self-worth was just so low. I couldn't. Yeah, it was almost like I felt like I deserved it.
What was this guy doing with his time if he wasn't working? Just
sat around watching box sets. He was supposed to be doing the house up. Because that was what we was. He trained as a foster parent, and there was always an excuse why we hadn't got kids with us, because I kept my registration, I kept working, so that we'd got a fallback for when we didn't have children with us. So he was going to be, this was how he marketed it to me, he was going to be the full-time foster carer, and we got the room, and we got the training, and we got the wherewithal. And then but there was always an excuse, and it was just like, well, why don't you get a job then? Well, but he never would. And he said, well, I'm going to do I'm the one that's going to do the work to the house. It's all cosmetic. But yeah, he did absolutely nothing. He just sat around all the time in my dressing gown. I don't know why that annoyed me so much, but I burned it. Last year I burned it, and I loved burning that dressing gown. But anyway, it just makes you sound like such an idiot when you say it out loud. I just feel so stupid. But you're
I don't think so. It's what it represents.
Yeah,
You know.
it does. But then, like I say, that was when it just spiraled down and down, and I was just giving so much of myself. I just got nothing left to give, and I was just exhausted with it. I was totally exhausted with it. And I was trying to give. I just didn't feel like I deserved anything myself. I just had to give to the kids, give to him, give to my patients, and my employers, and that was all I was worth. I wasn't. I had to put my own needs and everything to one side. And it's like I say, it culminated in that day when I was sitting in the car park going, the kids are better off without me. He's a better person than me because I just felt lower. I just felt the lowest of the low. I felt horrendous, and it culminated with me sitting in the car that day when my mate texted me, and I was honest with him, and I said, I'm not good, and this is why. And that was when I went to Rock to Recovery, and it was the biggest eye opener. When I had that first meeting, which was really quickly after I contacted them, it was like this. It was like this fog cleared. I think that's the best way to describe it. And yeah, it was incredible. It was instant. It was instant the way I felt, because I'd suddenly got this tool to reframe, so what Jamie gave me was the ability to understand that the things that had happened and the meaning, it was the meaning that I gave to words and deeds and actions and the things that had happened to me that changed my perspective on them. And over that time, and I've got it written on my mirror in, those chalk pens, I am not my mind, sky not weather. And I look at that every morning and I think, because that's what Rock to Recovery helped me to do, this tool that they've given me. Because when Mandy talked about how when the system gets so dysregulated, when you have that many basically brushes with death, when your polyvagal nerve, you've got your basal ganglion, and then your polyvagal nerve kicks in, and then you're just like, I am going to die. So, all of those systems are breached. I never had that acknowledgement that those systems had been breached. So that damage was done. So that damage because really what Mandy is talking about is preventative medicine. So I am one of those people that's so far down the line, so that you can't really practice that with me. The damage is there. So it's how do you deal with that damage? And what Rock to Recovery gave me was the understanding that my mind was controlling my body and these physiological processes. But I am not my mind. I am Sam, who sits in this body. And if I look at my mind as a separate entity, I've got more control.
When you say in your mind, you're talking about your mind in the physical sense?
Yeah.
Right, okay, I can just...
Yeah. With those physiological processes.
Yeah.
So, and understand that mind has an effect. So if I separate me from my mind, I've got control over my mind rather than it controlling me. Mm-hmm. And that's how I go about it. So I've had to stand back and go, okay, so how do I control these physical, what switches my mind off, basically, so that I can be present in myself and look at my mind as a separate entity and ask myself, what is my mind doing at the moment that it shouldn't be, that's making me feel this way? And so I stopped drinking almost straight away. So I was only drinking because of the trauma. So stopped drinking. That was a really bad thing. Not for me. for my now ex, because I realised it was one less thing to sort of control me or make me feel bad about. And the fact I didn't miss it, and it wasn't hard to give up drinking as well, was a sign of the fact I wasn't dependent. I wasn't drinking too much. I was just drinking when I needed it. And alcohol makes me really ill now. Can't stand it. So I stopped drinking and I started swimming, and the colder the water, the better. And that was by accident, because we had a memo come through, and I think it was the MS Society said about, they sort of marketed it as cold water immersion therapy, because if you have, because they didn't want to put people off who hadn't got access to cold water, for example, to a river or a stream or an ice bath or whatever. You can just run cold water in your bath or have a cold shower. And I thought, well, I've got this lovely lake at the top of the village. Oh, I've got the river just over there, because the boys are in the river all the time from sort of May to September. So I started swimming every day. It's amazing. It literally, you're in the best way possible. When you get into cold water, your brain just goes into survival mode. You cannot think of anything else. It's just...
Yeah, I've done it a few times. I've done it with... a lady called Anna Goff, who she has got a cold water immersion therapy in Milton Keynes, and then I've got a friend who suffers really badly with anxiety and PTSD and the symptoms associated with thereof, and he does, or has done regularly in the past, in a river in Swansea. Goes and gets in the river in Swansea. That's where I went and first tried it, actually. Yeah, in the wild. Yeah. In inverted commas. I lasted about 30 seconds. He was fine there, but then when I went to and did it with Anna, it was 5, 6, 7 minutes I think I was in for. But I see the appeal. I see the appeal 100%. And because the way I look at it is, one, from this is what I think I get from it anyway. One is there's a physiological benefit. I think just getting really cold and your body having to then take action to recover from that and get warm again. I think it's that's the same reason I like the sauna. Getting really hot and then cooling itself down, or fighting to stay cool. But the other one is just as basic as it is. It's a challenge. It is not nice. It's not nice. I don't want to do it. I'm going to make myself do it. Oh, I did it. Oh my God, I feel so good.
Yeah.
It's like that, that simple. That's simple. That's how I get what I get from it anyway. But then it sounds like you get a lot more.
Yeah, and it's because it's like this little lake in the middle of nowhere. And it's quite cool all year round, because it's tarn fed, so it's little tarns, so it's spring fed from the bottom. So of course the water's been through the ground, so it's quite cool when it comes up. So you get like a thermal layer at the top in the summer, but it's pretty cold. And I go up there and I take my Kelly kettle and make myself a brew while I'm in the water. And it's just like a little ritual, just the things that keep me up there for longer, just in this.
You make a brew while you're in the water?
Well, I leave the kettle boiling while I'm in the water.
Yeah, and then pour it, and you have the brew while you're still in the water?
Sometimes I have done before. I'll go back in, I'll pick my mug up and I'll go back in. That's quite nice, actually. I quite enjoy that. But I tend to, while the kettle's boiling while I'm in, and then I get out. I've got one of those Aldi freezer bags. The bags that you put all your freezer stuff in. Yeah. I've got one of those, because it's all foil lined, and I put a hot water bottle in it, wrap my dry robe in a hot water bottle, and put my dry robe in a freezer bag, so it's nice and warm. And I've got all these little tricks.
You're a pro.
Oh, I love it. Absolutely love it. And I'll go everywhere. I'm swimming just for fun at the moment, because of the MS. I can't run or walk the Dragon's Back anymore, unfortunately, which is you'll have heard of it if you like montane stuff. But the Dragon's Back, it's a fell race from Carnarvon Castle to Cardiff Castle along the mountainous spine of Wales. But they do it in 6 days. And then they do little. Have you seen they do the little reports for the years of the year of the athletes who completed the previous year's race?
Oh, okay. And
6-9 months later, the sort of top 5 still haven't recovered. But I couldn't walk or run it anymore probably. But as long as I've got cold water to get into, at some point I can still climb mountains and do stuff. I did Cadair Idris the other week, and a couple of weeks before that I did the Watkin Path pools. That was incredible. That was like a spa day. But so I've decided to swim the Dragon's Back. So I'm just going to walk up and swim in every body of water I can find.
Oh, cool.
Along the Dragon's Back. And my middle son, who is a brilliant artist, is doing a map of Wales on the wall in the hall at the moment, and we're going to cover it in magnetic varnish so I can stick pins in it.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So, but yeah, I'm just doing that. I mean, if anyone came along and said, yeah, we'll sponsor you or promote you to do it or whatever, then I wouldn't say no. But for the moment, I'm just doing it for me. I'm not doing it for any other reason.
Do you know what? And sometimes it's all it needs to be.
Yeah.
You know, sometimes it all it needs to be. I think you get a lot of people who they feel like they want to do something challenging, but then they feel obliged because other people do it. They feel obliged that they have to turn it into a fundraising event. Or what's the point? And then I see the benefit of that, but also I see, well, hang on a minute, just keep it for yourself. It's okay to be that selfish. Keep it for yourself. Why make it about anything else? And additionally, put the pressure on yourself.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Just do it for yourself, man. That is it. That's it. And then maybe the next time, if you like doing it and going to do it again or something similar, maybe think about it next time. But
yeah, I mean, it's probably going to take me years. But I mean, that's something that I've got to look forward to.
No, you got 6 days. You got 6 days, Sam, to do all that.
To swim every body of water along. Yeah, I was thinking of the logistics of it. I've I've got hypothermia.
It's a lot of bruise. It's a lot of bruise.
Oh, I know. God.
You're going to need more than one dry rope.
Yeah, I am. Yeah, if anyone's listening who wants to give me an extra dry rope.
We're going to have to start wrapping this up in a minute.
Yeah, sorry about that.
No, don't apologise. It's been really interesting to listen to it, and I think really useful as well. Like so Hannah came in again. She was in yesterday.
Oh, was she?
Yeah, so she came in again because the first time she came in, because we didn't get around to talking about what she wanted to talk about, or as in all the art and that side of stuff, which I was really interested in. We ended up on the narcissism. Oh, you've listened to the podcast. Anyways, she came back in and we did touch on it again. So it's interesting to get another perspective on that from someone else who's been through a similar experience from yourself. So it's honestly really thoroughly enjoyed it. Thoroughly enjoyed the conversation and the benefit people are going to get from it. It was very difficult listening at times, and I mean, you're an incredibly inspiring individual. I know that, and you're thinking about a book in the works, right? Is a book in the works? Do you want to mention that or not?
Yeah, I can do it, but again, it's quite difficult writing. So I can
imagine. Yeah.
I haven't taken on a commission for it simply because I didn't want to be pressed with a time scale. But it's called An Angel from Demons, and it's I was determined when it was sort of the idea was put to me about writing it. I said, well, I'm not writing a misery memoir because that's just I don't just want to write about being miserable. And I thought I see the world very differently because of the things that happened to me, the way my brain was wired. My mind was wired, not me, my mind, which is a separate entity altogether. And I think, so what it's actually about is, although I have talked about the things that have happened to me, I've actually related them to the people that I've helped in order, to sort of demonstrate that it isn't such a bad thing. You need people like me out there. I know that I had a pretty crap time of it, but I didn't know any different. So it's not like I had this idyllic childhood and then it all exploded. I've had the tools since before I can remember, since I had language or the ability to walk. I've had the tools to do these things, make these assessments, stay alive. So I know no different. So it's not this miserable existence for me. It's how I've used the experiences I've had for good, really. So that's and the situations that I've related the various things that happened to me and the sort of the attempts on my life and things, and how I've spotted, you know, maybe frequent flyers, as we term them at work, or I'm the person that spotted someone's acute distress when actually it looks like they're presenting with a medical condition.
Frequent flyers? Sorry, frequent flyers?
Yeah, it's just people that come in again and again and again, and you don't, you know, they're not necessarily, they're not attention seeking. They just come in with the same problem, and it's treated as an entirely medical problem. And then they come in with the same thing. So all you're doing is just like masking the symptoms and sending them home. You're not actually getting to the root cause of the problem. And it's when you get to the root cause of the problem that you actually stop them constantly coming in, because you've dealt with the
root cause. Got it.
Yeah.
Okay. 2 questions. So. What would you suggest is a good resource for people to go to either understand or deal with abusive relationships that they're maybe in? And the second one, same question for MS. Or if they think they may be in an abusive relationship, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people, when they're in it, they don't realise. They don't realise. A lot of them think it's their problem. So I would say there's a really good resource online called the Freedom Programme, and there is so if somebody suspects that they are, or if they're not comfortable in their relationship and they don't know if they're in an abusive relationship at all, there's a brilliant book, and you can read it online, and you can read it, there's like a secret setting, I think, so that other people can't find it, so you can read it without anyone knowing that you've read it, and it's called Living with the Dominator. You can buy the book anywhere, and it basically describes the different types, and there's overlaps as well between the different types, and it's by a woman called Pat Craven, and that's a really good place to start. And then obviously Women's Aid are absolutely brilliant. If you can phone them up anonymously, or there's the Penny Appeal domestic abuse helpline, and if you suspect that you're experiencing domestic abuse, you can go to them, and they'll signpost you, and they'll tell you straight out, no, that is abuse, that isn't abuse. But 9 times out, 100% of the time, if you think you're being abused and you're feeling that bad that you pick up the phone to someone like Women's Aid, you can guarantee that that's exactly what it is. Yeah. And you can ask for Annie in places like Boots and supermarkets if you actually feel directly threatened. My
just fascinating fact. So my old man. It's an interesting subject to me. One that I wish didn't exist, in terms of like women in abusive relationships, abusive husbands for whatever reason. But my old man, when he was younger, he went and he used to volunteer. Or he did volunteer. I might be bushing this story. Sorry, Dad, but he used to volunteer on the first ever women's aid hostel in London, and I forget the bloody name of it. Yeah, and there's reasons he was to volunteer there. And there's a future guest coming on. Actually, who's a bloke who's not a dissimilar upbringing to yourself, not dissimilar at all. So I mean, it's like it's fascinating to listen to for all the wrong reasons. It's very insightful for people to listen to, I think, especially for people who are on the peripheries and may think they see something like that going on, and maybe not. It just helps them understand that better. But it's just upsetting that, and it's like when I got upset earlier. I can't do it again now, because with my daughters, is that thinking that there's people like you who are in that situation. There's kids in that situation now. Yeah. There's kids in that situation now, and it's just when you think about that, what their lives must be like. There's a little you again now. Yeah. Going through a similar situation as as rare as that. Well, is it rare? I don't know, but it exists. You can't, and that's just. I just wish it didn't exist. I just wish it didn't exist. Like, I wish you didn't have to go through that yourself at all. I wish other people don't. However, back to the point you made just now is like the benefit you bring to other people by being able to sit here and talk about it.
Yeah.
So you've gone through all that crap, which is horrendous, but and yet there's some good coming of it because of the way you articulate your experiences, the way you articulate how it came about, and that ultimately helps people, I think.
Yeah.
Will help people, which is great to hear that, there's a book in the pipeline, definitely.
And Women's Aid will signpost men as well who are experiencing domestic abuse.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. Just because you're they'll signpost you to different resources, but they won't turn you away if you're a guy, because it's more common than you think. Not more common than you think.
What about MS resources? The
MS Society are absolutely brilliant. They've got a huge wealth of information online. And you'll find each county in each area have like a really good regional centre, and there's clubs, and I'm part of one. I find it quite hard going though, because everyone's more affected than me and they're all in couples, and I just think I go along because it's useful to know but I don't go very often. It's like a lunch once a week, I think it is, on a Tuesday, and I probably go about once every 6 or 7 weeks just to sort of touch base and sort of see people. But I just, because I do push myself, because I'm on my own with the boys, and I suppose my biggest, I'm not scared of dying, but my biggest fear is that I will succumb to this before the boys are old enough not to need me. And like I say, the resources are brilliant, but I couldn't give people an awful lot of feedback about those, because I'm at a stage where I try and avoid them, because it's too much of a smack in the face of kind of what's coming. Mm-hmm. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes total sense.
Yeah,
it makes total sense.
Yeah, so
yeah,
I'd say that's it.
Thank you for coming in, talking about it. I know it's not been easy. And
I didn't cry though, I'm amazed.
No, you got me bloody crying.
Yeah, sorry.
You nearly cried in the icebreaker.
I did actually.
You nearly cried in the icebreaker.
It's a bit of a...
I should have, knowing what was coming later, you're going to make me cry on this. I should have got you crying. I should have pushed a little bit harder on the icebreaker.
Yeah.
Anyway, how can people get hold of you or find you if they want to get in touch with you? Can they?
Yes, Discord is probably the best place at the moment, because I'm a bit of a recluse. Yeah, I do hide my light under a bushel. I'm going to make more of an effort, because I've really gotten into, with the wild swimming, I've really got into photography and sort of self-portraiture as well on a lot of my swims. And I'm hopefully having an exhibition locally, just a little art gallery locally of my sort of journey, for want of a better word. And that's a plug I will give, because as a resource for help and support with things like MS, every county will have a Young Carers Association, and Credi, which is Powys Young Carers, have been absolutely amazing for my boys, and they do a lot with the arts as well to support kids and parents. And it's Credi that are helping me with support in writing and publishing the book, and also starting off with the exhibition of my photography work. And I would say that as a resource, if you've got MS, your local Young Carers Association, if you've got kids, is a really good place to start, because the kids are generally, if you go to a Young Carers Association because it's a parent that's affected, you tend to get, it's a much livelier place than going to, say, an MS meeting and sort of being confronted by people that have got the same condition than you, who are further down the line and sicker. Whereas you've got kids of all ages running around, and you've got parents with different conditions, but you've still got the support there. You've still got someone that understands. So my middle son, who was really struggling at one point, made really good mates with a lad who now volunteers for them, because he's in his early 20s now, and they've actually become really good mates, and his mum has MS. So that's a really good resource as well when I think about it.
And are the young carers associations everywhere, are they?
Yeah. If you look up young carers for your county, but you asked me how people could get hold of me. So in the first instance, probably Discord is the best place. And
which servers are you in apart from H-Hour?
The SEG group.
Okay,
as
so
well.
Senators Guild Discord server and the H-Hour Discord server. Yeah, all right.
And Facebook. If you're not friends with me, I've obviously got Messenger. You can find me.
Discord's a good spot. I like Discord because you can maintain a level of pseudonymity in there, or a complete anonymity if you want. Now people can come and find you. There's no, they're not able to. You're not able to, like, so if people come and connect with you on Discord, you know, like, they don't have access to your phone number, they don't have access to your email address. But they got access to you directly. Yeah. And you can control that either way. It's a great platform. And
I really need to get out there more in terms of things like promoting the swimming and the artwork, the photography, but I'm like a lot of people who've got a background like mine, is that I don't like to stick my head over the parapet, but I should be a lot more proactive. So I do have an Instagram account, but it's probably easy. I'm Llywith on Discord, so that's LLIWEDD. That's right, yeah. It's my favourite mountain.
Good Welsh name.
Welsh name. It's right next to Snowdon. Looks like something out of Lord of the Rings.
You should. Where's your TikTok account? You should get a TikTok account.
I don't.
Bearing in mind that you do the knitting as well, and you're making clothes.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, there is a market on TikTok. There will be a market on TikTok for people watching time-lapse videos of you making a scarf, or you're knitting me a hat as well, aren't you?
I'm knitting you a hat.
I appreciate that very much. Thank you very much. Of knitting something, people would lap that up on TikTok. I'm telling you now.
Really?
Yeah. Or time-lapse video of you swimming around the lake. I'm telling you, TikTok is the place to be. 100%.
Really?
Fuck Instagram.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna send you the Jedi funeral for you to put up.
The Jedi funeral.
Yeah.
Well, put that in Discord. Well, I wanted to play it on the podcast. I got no way of doing it now.
Yeah.
I've literally about.
I'll send it to you.
Yeah. Do you know what? I might. In fact, I'll tell you what I'll do. At the end of this, when this video finishes, I'll put it. I'll snip it on the end. So after we switch off now, it'll go straight into a video that Sam's sons did. Of you were away, weren't you? You were away, and your hamster sadly died. Oh, sad face. Yeah. And they give it a Jedi funeral. Right? Stay on and watch this video. It is fucking class. Yes, well done, Sound Boys, and thank you again for coming on.
Pleasure.
That's it. Thank you for watching the H-Hour podcast. If you're enjoying the podcast and you haven't already done so, please subscribe here, around about there. I'm hoping it's around about there where the button's going to appear. If it's not already appeared. You can also, if you want to listen to the podcast on your commute, for example, when you're driving, when it's not practical to watch the podcast, you can listen to it. It's on Spotify, it's on Apple Podcasts, it's on Google Podcasts, it's everywhere. It's on all of the common and not so common podcast apps. You can also, if you wish to do it, become a patron of H Hour. Becoming a patron of H Hour, you get access to all of the interviews before anyone else. So this interview with this guest was released days, if not weeks, before it was on release to the general public. And you also get access to exclusive interviews, which I do with each guest, that last about 5-10 minutes, that are based on questions that the patrons themselves of H Hour have chosen. And each guest, this one included, gets asked those questions before the main podcast starts getting recorded. It's like a pre-podcast interview, lasts about 10 minutes. And those interviews are really insightful, really enjoyable, nice and short, and they're only released to patrons. They never get released to the public. I don't know why I had a little stutter there. You also get access to a Discord community, exclusive Discord community only for patrons. You also get invited to a monthly Zoom call with myself and all the other patrons, and very often, most months, we have a previous podcast guest comes onto that Zoom call and has an exclusive Q&A with the patrons. In addition to this, there's monthly giveaways where I give away gifts to my Patreon supporters, and it's always, predominantly veteran-owned stuff. I'll go and buy veteran-owned apparel, veteran-owned product services, and I'll give them away to my Patreon supporters. And I'll also do exclusive invites for events, so you'll get freebie tickets to events. To become a patron of H Hour, go to patreon.com/HK podcasts. I'm spelling Patreon, Patreon, patreon.com/HK podcasts. Hit become a patron. And I'll see you on the next Zoom Q&A if you do. Oh, you also get your name in the credits. Thanks for watching. I will catch you next time.